I'm with Paul Robbins from Comfort My People. Now, Paul, what is Comfort My People?
Well, Comfort My People is a ministry to the Jewish people in Israel and beyond. Obviously, our focus is Israel, but because Jews are throughout the world and they're without the gospel, the message of freedom that comes through Yeshua and Yeshua alone, we want to reach them in every way we can. And we found that the most suitable and profitable and effective way is through the indigenous. So in Israel, we support ministries. Right now, we support 12 ministries that are based in Israel, all believers, of course, and working in different parts of Israel, but also in different ways, very creative, very carefully. But because they know the language, they know the people, they know the situations, they know the finance difficulties, and they're very acquainted with the war that is currently going on. Many of them have served or will serve, or they have family members serving. So it's a very intimate relationship that they have with all the dealings of Israel on a day-to-day basis, and they're the most effective in reaching their fellow citizens.
Is it difficult reaching out to Jewish people?
Yes, it is. It is difficult. It's challenging, mainly because of history that's associated with the name of Jesus, that if you are a Jew and you come to faith in him, you put your faith in Jesus, even though he's the Jewish Messiah, because of the history associated with his name, you're considered a traitor to your people. So, yes, it's very difficult.
What sort of projects are you supporting?
Well, we support 12 ministries in Israel right now, and each one of them has their own vision in different ways. For instance, in Bethlehem, we support Palestinian Christians. They're not Jewish, but being a Christian, which is a true follower of Jesus, not just the religious aspect of Christianity, that they are always doing outreaches, always throughout what is commonly known as the West Bank, but Judea, Samaria. They're always doing outreaches there, bringing the gospel where it's never been encountered. But the biggest project that they're underway right now is the Bethlehem encounter, a nativity encounter in Bethlehem, which will be an opportunity for the history of Bethlehem and the surrounding area to be known to the surrounding people, citizens who live there and nearby. They could learn their biblical history. They're rooted in biblical history. And then from there, talk about Jesus was not just born here, but he lived and he grew up in the land of Israel. And so they tell the whole story from that perspective. And it's something that most, not Gazans, but not just Bethlehemites, but all those living in the West Bank area who are mainly Muslim that have very little knowledge of the biblical narrative. So it's a way in to bring the truth that liberates. That's one. And I could keep going from there, but I don't know how much time we have. We support
Yes.
ministries that are doing
Yeah.
all kinds of different things.
Have you been able to respond to the war situation?
Oh yeah, definitely. I just came back from a meeting right now. This is in US. It's Thursday morning, and I went to a meeting that has been going on for over 10 years in this one home every single week, same day. They've never missed a day. So I kind of tiptoed into their lives because they didn't know me, but I went by invitation. This is now the third time, so I've been called back, which says something for them because they were very educated and well-established Christians. But when it comes to Israel and the Jewish people and the gospel in that regard, they are somewhat ignorant, which is not unusual. But they've allowed me into their lives so I could begin the informative process of not just telling them what's going on within Israel and this war, especially, but the biblical connection that everything that is going on has to do with them and their part to play. So I really try to hone it down that I don't just go there as a Bible teacher or guest speaker, but to bring them into relationship with their fellow believers in Israel who are doing the work on the ground in the midst of war.
If the people where you're at in America understand the war situation here in Israel, the difficulties that Israel is facing?
Very, very little. It's sad. And I'm very hesitant to tell that to our fellow believers in Israel. I was just there last March, and I was asked that same question by several of our colleagues, what's going on in America, they seem so much on board to support us in what we're doing. They knew this was an effort that's common to them. It's to combat evil and the militancy of Islam. And they should know that if we don't fight this war, they're going to be fighting it on their own shores, which is very true. And so there was this supportive sense. But as the propaganda began to spread, this is what I heard from Israelis now. It seems like Christians now have moved over to the other side. We're getting like silence from them, and not just lack of, support financially, but spiritually, prayerfully, and we're getting negative responses now. So they're very concerned about this lack of understanding of really what's going on there.
You're based in Florida. What is the mood
Yes.
like against the Jewish people in Florida?
Well, Florida has a very large Jewish population in the southern part and also in southern eastern part of like the Miami area and that whole surrounding area of South Florida, and also on the West Coast, but not as large. But there have been the Palestinian strongholds in the colleges and the university campuses for a long time here. And so that propaganda has spread significantly over time. Here's the thing that I have to applaud our governor for. He saw this ahead of time. Obviously it was happening originally in college campuses in the North and California. And he realized that we cannot allow this to happen in our campuses. And he clamped down immediately and made it known that it's not going to be tolerated here. So we have not seen the same spread, although anti-Semitism has risen its ugly head once again in difficult ways ever since October 7th. Yeah, I know at Hanukkah there was an incident that took place right not far from our home, an incident anti-Semitic, which was very publicly, visible.
Do you feel safe?
Do I feel safe in the shelter of his arms and his wings in the secret place of the Most High? I feel very safe. My concern is not for myself as much as it is it for my children. We have four children, grown children, 10 grandchildren, and one great grandchild. The youngest of them all know nothing about what's going on. They know nothing about anti-Semitism or Jewish history, but the older ones are familiar and have experienced some of their own where they live. So I am more concerned about their safety and reasonably so.
Now, you came to Israel in March. Why did you want to come in a time of war?
Mostly to see how our fellow believers are doing. We call them mishpacha. That means family in Hebrew. It's a very strong relational word with a picture of, being on the same page, comrades, being able to speak truth to one another, correct one another if needed. So I wanted to see how everyone was doing because many of them have served, if not most of them, have served in the IDF. Many of them have children that are now serving. Some have grandchildren that are serving. Some have son-in-laws or daughter-in-laws who are serving. So, the temperature has risen emotionally as well as every other way, but they're doing well. So that was a huge concern. I was very pleased to see the Messianic community in line with each other and very strong bonding, which grateful for. And I also wanted to see what kind of needs and how can we assist with their efforts, even more so than we've been before.
Is God doing something with the Israelis at the moment, with the Israeli heart, change, a softening in their heart during this time of war?
I am, yes. And I'm most of it's my own personal conversations because I am very outgoing and I try to speak to as many Israelis in whatever situation, especially soldiers, because they're always public. And I will go to them and I will tell them, my appreciation, gratitude, and respect for them as they serve. And they always come back and say, well, we have to. And I say, I know you have to, but you do it. And you're protecting us in the process. And I honor them for it. But then that usually breaks down barriers regarding Yeshua. And I begin the conversation at that point, whether it's soldiers or just common citizens. I've sensed this willingness to, first of all, have conversation regarding Jesus, Yeshua, the Messiah. And the other one is asking real questions, not just trying to trick me like the Pharisees did to Jesus, but to really know, to want to know. I mean, understanding that Jesus is Jewish is foreign to many of them. And when they hear that, there's a sense of credibility. Are you sure that's true? But more and more people know that now. It's become more and more received. They're very, obviously, you know this very well. The Jews are suspicious, but in a way that's reasonably thought out, that, they have reason to be suspicious, but they're asking questions that are not trick questions. They're really inquisitive to want to know, is this Jesus someone that I can actually pursue? And if I do, what am I going to come up with? And what is it going to be, on my part? What do I have to do, to go further to know him? So those conversations really, I didn't have very often in the past, but now I believe that hearts are open and receptive.
How did you become a believer in Yeshua?
I became a believer in 1980. It was through reading the Bible. I was drawn to read it. It was strange. It's a long story leading up to that, but I was always, even as a boy, but mostly as a college age, searching for the meaning of life. And
Mm.
so that was a very serious search for me. And it went on for some years, and I got involved with all kinds of things that were painful, but it led me to the point where I felt compelled to read the Bible. And I was traveling at the time. I lived in a truck that I had designed, rebuilt and designed like a camper type thing. But I felt compelled to read the Bible every night. And a woman, a friend of mine's mother, gave me a New Testament. And I had read through the Old Testament. As a Jew, you learn stories, but you don't really put them together growing up, Hebrew school and whatnot. But the New Testament I had never read. And when I started to read it and realized Jesus was Jewish, I was shocked. And so that led me further on to read more. And through circumstances and difficulties, and actually an highly anti-Semitic boss, I asked Jesus one day in my kitchen floor, sitting down, I just said, God, I don't know if you're real. I just don't know if you're real. And Jesus, I have no idea who you are, but I get a feeling you and God have something in common. I don't know what that means, but I need to know. And that was the beginning of my experience with him personally, and has grown ever since.
And you've written some books as well. What are the books that you've written?
First book I wrote was called The Milkman's Story, and the second one I wrote more recently is called Inappropriate.
What are they about?
The Milkman's Story is subtitled that what happens when a Jewish carpenter meets a Gentile milkman. The Gentile milkman was the first pastor that I'd ever really met. And we began going to, by recommendation, we said you should go to a church and start growing. And he was a milkman by trade until he got saved. I think it was in the mid 60s, 1960s, early 1960s. And from that point on, he gave his life wholeheartedly to the Lord and started studying the Bible on his own in his basement, and came to faith in Jesus in a very living way. And his representation of him was so beautiful and so attractive and so thorough, and in his understanding of scripture and who Jesus was. He encouraged me to explore my Jewish faith, my background, the history, the rootedness, and in the process, to be a biblical, student, and ultimately to teach. And so his method of discipleship as a pastor, I thought it was common because I knew nothing about other churches until, I started to open up and go to visit different places. And he ultimately retired and died. But I realized that this man is very rare. And so I tried to get a book written about him by a friend of mine who was an author. He went around interviewing all kinds of people who were discipled by him, churches that were started through him, and other ministries. And he came back after a week of traveling and interviews. He said, "You need to write this book." And so I very reluctantly took his advice, and it took me 6 years before I could
Wow.
write it because it was so difficult for me to put it together. And he assisted me in some of the editing. But yeah, so that's how that one. Inappropriate is a message to the church regarding the distance that the church has with the Jewish people, Israel in particular, not in a political sense, not in a sense of eschatology, but in a relational sense, according to the scriptures. It's this ancient enmity should be broken. The hostility should be broken, at the cross, and that there should be this united front, Jew and Gentile, as one new man. And yet, where is this one new man? So that's what's got my attention. And I started reading very seriously certain portions of the New Testament and started writing. Actually, it was in the beginning of COVID. The moment it happened was I was on staff in a global mission organization, and I represented for them both two things: construction ministries to the nations in which they served, the needs to meet them, training and working alongside of them. And the other one, though, that developed later on, like 2013, I was asked to begin ministry in Israel because they had none. And so I did that, and I started that, and I was working in the office there on a regular basis, still as a carpenter to support. And COVID struck, and the office closed down. I took my computer, I plugged it in to a room in our house, and as soon as I plugged the computer in and turned it on, I felt God say to me to close the door behind you. And basically, it comes from Isaiah 26, and I don't want to misquote it, but enter into your chambers, close the door behind you until what is the word? It's basically the meaning of the word is this tragedy subsides. And I wish I remembered the word, forgive me. I think it's Isaiah 26, I know, but maybe verse 3. But to me, it was like kind of foreign. What does God mean by this? I thought this was just a passing thing, this COVID thing. But I did. I got on my knees. I was just really shook by that, the Holy Spirit speaking to me that way. And I just began to pray. And when I got up, I felt God was telling me just to start writing. And that was kind of foreign to me. Not that I don't write, but that I would just start writing. And I began, and I didn't stop until I completed a book, which is called Inappropriate.
What is your prayer for Israel today during this difficult time?
Well, it's the same prayer I've been praying since the beginning, that all Israel would be saved and in my lifetime. And God, I want you to include me in the process. How can I be a part of this, Lord? How can I serve you with my limitations, my distance? And how can I reach the church, which is, what I've been a part of since I got saved? I've served in many aspects, but there's this deafening that's taken place it's shocking because it shouldn't be that way. There's life in the pursuit of God, and in pursuit of Him, you can't miss Israel on the pathway. You can't miss the Jewish people. They're all over the book. And so for me to feel so alone in this, and I'm not alone, I know I'm not, but to feel alone, just like Elijah felt alone, just like, when he ran away into the cave, that sense of feeling alone, and you feel there's something to say, there's something to communicate, but there's not an audience out there. It had a frustration to it. So my prayer was, Lord, in spite of me, bring the gospel to your people. They desperately need it. They don't know that there was a man, a baby born in Bethlehem that was prophesied from long ago, from Ancient of Days. He lived forever before forever. And he is the Messiah that they've been longing for. And some have ignored and given up on or mistaken him for someone else. But Lord, you need to reach them. And what part can I play in this is my question consistently.
What's your website for people who'd like to know more about the work that you do?
Comfortmypeople.com from Isaiah chapter 40, verses 1 and 2.
Well, Paul, thank you very much for sharing today.
It's been my pleasure, Paul. It's an honor.